When you're ready, you just have to click. It's gonna start as soon as that's already out.
The wheel was locked.
Good?
Yes, yes, please.
All right, hi everyone. My name is Kristen Lazar, and today I'm going to be presenting along with my group about selection. I'm going to be discussing the different selection methods. Kiana is going to follow with application and resume review. Rachel will be talking about interviewing. Shannon will be talking about testing, and Stephanie will end with making the offer. So there are many steps to hiring a new employee, and this includes outlining the job analysis, recruiting candidates, going through the resumes, deciding who you want to interview, and then finally selecting and then deciding who you want to hire. So it's important for businesses to lay out what kind of selection method they want to use in the interview process so that the hiring process is as consistent as possible and the people making the interviews know what to look for and like with the job criteria of the interview so they know who they want to hire. And the two basic selection methods are clinical and statistical. So the first selection method is the clinical selection approach. And this approach is the most common in business today. It usually just involves a team of interviewers and they come together to decide who they want to hire based on the interview and the resume alone. They use like behavioral interview questions along with the resume and their job criteria. So if a person has a lot of experience and background in their field, then they'll go to hire that person. And the interviewers in this case can have different perceptions about strengths of each candidate, which is why this approach leads to a lot of room for error. So if since the interviewers may have different opinions on the candidate, this leaves a lot of room for error. The one consideration is disparate treatment, where they can basically hire someone and disregard their age, race, or gender. So this is why the other selection method was approached. So for my personal story, over the past summer, I got a new job. And when I was doing this project, I started thinking about how I was selected for this job. So I got hired at TD Bank. I was first approached by the HR manager and then sent to the store for a panel interview. So when I asked my managers at my job about their selection process, they described the clinical selection method. At my job, they use a panel interview style, so all three managers get to meet the candidate. These involves the store manager, the sales and service manager, and the teller service manager. They're all involved because they run different parts of the store. So they use a basic set of behavioral interview questions such as, what would you do in this situation, or how would you deal with a difficult customer? And then they also told me a lot of who they select is based off of the vibes that they get in the interview. They use the word vibes. And they take notes during the interview to later discuss all together who they liked the best. So although this has given my company great employees like me, we can see how this would lead to disparate treatment in the hiring process. So to judge a person based on how the managers feel about them could go the wrong way if everyone they end up hiring doesn't fall under any of the protected classes. And although this is not the case for TD Bank, this is why the second selection method was made. So the second selection method is called the statistical method, and this method was developed to limit the personal stereotypes and perceptions of the interviewers by assigning scores and weights to each part of the job and different parts of the job criteria. Based on the position, this could change for each one. So for some jobs, the ability to work in a team might be more important, where in other jobs, a specific computer program could carry all the weight. So that's why it's important that the interviewers develop the job analysis before they go into the interview so they know what to look for and how to score them. So however the company decides to weigh each aspect of the interview can determine who is selected for the job. The ratings are multiplied by the weight of each part of the job criteria to get the total score for each candidate. This allows for a more fair interview process than we saw in the clinical selection method. Since this method is all numbers, it can limit disparate treatment in the hiring process. The numbers are less likely to be based off the stereotypes and personal bias, and that interviewers each score them and multiply their scores to get a total, and then they compare them so they can decide who to hire fairly without judgment and biases. So to lay it out, the hiring team reviews the job analysis and determine the criteria for the position. They then assign weights for each area and score ranges for each aspect. They rate the candidate on each area as they interview and then score the test afterwards and discuss all together like which candidate got the highest score. So once each hiring manager has scored each candidate, the hiring team can compare scores in each area and hopefully hire the best person in the most fair way. This method involves more thought than the clinical method, which is why it is not as common, but it can be beneficial in the long run for in-depth careers and not just like basic starter jobs. Within the statistical selection method, there's 3 models. So there's the compensatory model, the multiple cutoff model, and the multiple hurdle model. In the compensatory model, scoring high in a high weighted area can outweigh scoring low in all the low areas, or scoring high in low areas can offset scoring low in other areas. So the multiple cutoff model requires that a candidate has a minimum score level on all selection criteria. So for example, if the heaviest weight you can get is a 5, a candidate may be required to get at least 3 on all of the scores, 3 out of 5 on all the scores to go into the next step. And in the multiple hurdle model, only candidates with high scores go into the next stage of the selection process. So for example, if the highest weight is still a 5, the candidate may be required to get at least a 4 on almost all of the job criteria to move on to the next step or be hired. So as we can understand, the clinical selection method is more common because it is simpler and it's simple enough to base a candidate off their resume and interview, but the statistical method avoids bias and stereotypes. And now I'll pass it off to Kiana for applications or something.
Okay, hi everyone, my name is Kiana. Today I'll be covering criteria development and resume review. I'll be talking about things like validity and reliability and the process of reviewing resumes. Okay, all individuals involved in the hiring process should be properly trained on the steps for interviewing. These steps include developing criteria, reviewing resumes, developing interview questions, and weighing the candidates. The first aspect to selection is planning the interview process, which includes criteria development. Criteria development involves determining which sources of information will be used and how those sources will be scored during the interview. The criteria should be related to the job directly analysis and the job specifications. Some aspects of the job analysis and job specifications may be the actual criteria that you need to use for the job posting itself. Once the criteria has been developed, which again is your step 1, applications can now start to be reviewed. People have different methods of going through this process, but one of the main ways is through computer programs like Kristen said that can search for keywords in resumes, which will then help narrow down the number of resumes that must be looked at and reviewed. Before reviewing the resumes and applications, there must be a clear idea of the person that you want to hire for this position. The job specifications will help with the minimum qualifications, and these things can include education level and experience. Additional criteria might include other important characteristics and professional abilities that you might not be able to see on the resume and have to be demonstrated. A specific score on a personality test, quality of work, and other tools to determine qualifications should be included as part of the criteria. Knowing exactly what you want before you even go out to get it is the first process of making resume look-throughs a lot easier. Many HR professionals and managers develop the criteria for hiring as well as the interview questions before reviewing any resumes. This allows for streamlined processes with specific guidelines already set before the interviews. For example, criteria for a job might include a bachelor's degree in business or a closely related field. By setting criteria ahead of time, the hiring team has a clear picture of exactly what qualifications they're looking for. As a result, it's easier to determine who should move forward in the selection process. For example, if someone doesn't have the bachelor's degree, given the criterion, Their application materials can be filed away and even put away for a different job position later on. With that being said, the HR manager would then include resumes with 2 or more years of experience and a bachelor's degree into the interview pile. They can then develop interview questions that show the candidate's problem-solving, multitasking, and conflict management abilities to seek out who fits their company and their values best. Resume pairing or resume scanning software is readily available and can make the initial screening easier. For example, Sovereign Software allows the HR manager to include keywords such as bachelor's degree or management, and this software is it scans through all received resumes and it selects the ones that fit the criteria. So next is validity and reliability. Validity refers to how useful the tool is to measure a person's attributes for a specific job opening. A tool may include any and all of the following: resume scanning, reference checks, cognitive ability tests, interview questions, and credit reports. Biographical informational bibs are a useful part of the application process. A bib is a series of questions about a person's history that may have shaped his or her behavior. The bib can be scored in the same way as reviewing the interview or the resume, and assuming the organization knows which type of answers are predictable for a success in a part of a job. A weighted application form involves selecting an employee characteristic to be measured and then identifying which questions on the application predict that desired behavior. Scoring should be determined before any resumes and applications have been reviewed. Any tool used to determine someone's qualifications should have validity to determine that they are the right fit for the job. Once the criteria for a specific job is made, then your review process can finally begin. Everyone prefers to do this differently. Some hiring decision makers may review all resumes, then list the people that they would like to meet in person, and then compare those people. Another method might be to rate each candidate and then go to the interview process at that point. When looking at resumes to determine who to interview, a manager should be mindful of disparate impact and disparate treatment, like Kristen had said, to make sure that everyone gets a fair chance within the hiring process, and especially with inside of your company with promotions and things like that. Every criteria developed should be closely considered to see if it might have disparate impact on a protected group of individuals. Disparate treatment is when one person is intentionally treated differently than another. Disparate treatment in hiring might include not interviewing a candidate because, again, of their age, race, or gender. The last consideration is the hiring of internal versus external candidates. An internal candidate is someone who already works within your organization, where an external candidate is someone where you're going to pull from outside to bring into your organization for a new position. Even if they work within the organization, you want to make sure that disparate treatment doesn't occur because of favoritism. Internal candidates may be able to hit the ground running, but external candidates may come in with new perspectives for your company. Even if an internal candidate seems to be the best hire, it's best to still perform the process of posting the job and interviewing, since less vocal employees could be qualified candidates as well. In other words, don't assume that one person is the best fit for the job. So personal story, my old job, they like to do internal hiring because the employees are used to the company and how they work, and they want to give everyone the fair chance to move up in the company and take the chance to learn new positions and really be a help. If they couldn't find someone internally, that's when they would go externally. So overall, I covered criteria development, validity, and reliability, and the different ways of going through a reviewing process of resumes. And I will now be handing it off to Rachel, who will be talking about interviews.
Okay, thank you, Kiana. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Rachel DeGrossa. I'm going to be talking about the interviewing process during selection. Just a quick show of hands. How many of you guys have been on an interview this semester? Okay, so the majority. So most of us are probably used to the traditional interview and being the interviewee. So now I'm going to talk about the tactics that interviewers use. So interviewing processes can be time consuming, so it makes sense to choose the right type of interview for the type of job that you are hiring for. Some jobs, for example, may only require one interview, maybe just a telephone interview, where another requires a telephone interview and 1 to 2 traditional interviews as well. So the most common interview type, as I mentioned before, is the traditional interview. This is the, again, most common, the classic. It's just you and the interviewer sitting down in their office usually. It's a series of questions that are asked. I'm going to go into behavioral and situational questions. And I'm sure most of us are very familiar with this type of interviews, as a lot of us have been on these interviews this semester. So a phone interview is often used as like a screening process. It narrows the list of people receiving a traditional interview. It can also determine like salary requirements and kind of knock out anyone who isn't really great for the job. So for example, if you receive 200 resumes and narrow it down to 25 people, it's still not feasible to interview in person 25 people. So at this point, a phone interview would be the best choice. Video interviews are really common now. It's kind of the same as a traditional interview. It can be cost saving as well if one of your candidates is out of town. Skype actually offers free calls, and it may not feel the same as a traditional interview, but the same information can be gathered, and once again, you can decide if they're the right fit for the position. So it's likely that you will use one or more of these types of interviews. For example, again, you might conduct a phone interview and then follow up with a meal interview, which would be taking the candidate out to lunch or dinner, and then follow up again with the traditional interview, depending on the type of job and person that you are looking for. So most interviews consist of many types of questions. However, the most basic and the most common are behavioral and situational. We're familiar with behavioral as we do them in Professor Casper's class, but situationals are a little bit different. They give a sample situation, ask how he or she might deal with the situation, and behavioral is what the candidate has done previously and how they can apply that to this position. So as some of you may know, in our legal aspects of HR class, some interview questions are really illegal. So any questions regarding national origin, marital status, religion, disability, criminal record, as well as personal questions are illegal. Anything about weight, gender, arrest record, that all should be avoided. So HR professionals and managers should be aware of their body language during an interview. Some habits such as like nodding can like make the interviewee think that they're doing a good job when maybe they aren't. And you can also be sure to look out for halo effect, which when an interview becomes biased because of one positive or negative trait that the candidate possesses. So during an interview, there are many different types of biases that can occur. Some biases include interviewing, contrast, gut feeling, generalization, cultural, nonverbal, similar to me. I'm going to focus specifically on interviewing, generalization, similar to me, and cultural noise. So interview bias can occur in almost any interview situation. This type of bias is when an interviewer makes an assumption about the candidate that may not be accurate. This assumption can be detrimental to an interview process. For example, an interviewer asks a candidate questions and they answer the first two questions poorly, which leads you to believe that they're not qualified for the job, when maybe they really are. Generalization bias can occur when an interviewer assumes that how someone behaves in an interview is how they always behave. So for example, if an interviewee comes in and they're really nervous and flustered and they're answering questions poorly, it may give you the assumption that they always stutter and they're always nervous. A similar to me bias, which could be considered discriminatory, results when an interviewer has a preference for a candidate because he or she views that person as having similar attributes or characteristics as themselves. So sometimes this is also considered unconscious bias, which is often the case. And again, this is sometimes extremely unconscious and you may not even be aware that you are doing this to an interviewee. Another important bias is cultural noise bias. This bias occurs when a candidate thinks he or she knows what the interviewer wants to hear, so that's how they answer their questions. This is also where an interviewer can distinguish their abilities to a candidate's socially acceptable answer when they're really not revealing their true opinion. So once the criteria have been selected and interview questions are developed, it's time to start interviewing. An interviewing plan can determine the direction and process that should be followed. A couple of tips for planning include recruiting new candidates, establishing criteria, and how they will be rated, as we've talked about, and setting a timeline for interviewing and decision making. Connecting schedules with others also helps. Sending the interviews with candidates and set up any testing procedures, which Shannon's going to talk about later. Interviewing the candidates before any necessity testing, and once the results are back, meeting with the entire hiring team and making decisions that are based off the correct in-job criteria, and finally putting together an offer, which Steph is going to talk about shortly. So just a quick personal story, I'm actually an intern downstairs at the Center for Professional Development, and we often work with a lot of campus recruiters, and I often ask them, because I am an HR student, what they think about their selection and how they usually select. And it's really interesting to see company from company how they select, and sometimes it's often based on like company culture and different types of random things that you wouldn't think of, but it's really interesting to see. So as you can tell, a large part of the interviewing process is planning. I want to end on a few tips that can help you in your HR future. First tip is extremely important to train your employees, as employees often get in trouble for interviewing questions. Also, listening to the candidate, making sure that they feel comfortable and developing a good rapport with them and make the interviewee feel less nervous. And finally, being realistic about the job. Being honest up front helps a candidate when they're exactly what they're in for when they apply for this job. Also, watch your own body language, make sure that you're standing up straight, acting proper, and then body language, again, is such a powerful tool of seeing if someone is a right fit for the job. So thank you all for listening, and I hope you guys learned some interesting tips about interviewing and some things that you can take to your future HR career. I'm now going to pass it on to Shannon, who will speak about test administration.
Hello everyone, I'm Shannon, and during my presentation I will be discussing test administration. Test administration procedures are developed for an exam program in order to help reduce measurement error and to increase likelihood of fair, valid, and reliable assessment. Specifically, appropriate standardized procedures improve measurements by increasing consistency and test security. Before reviewing resumes and applications, you must get a clear idea of what you are looking for in a person you want in hire. Obviously, the job specifications will help you know the minimum qualifications such as education level, years of experience. Pre-employment tests are used to screen job applicants and can include testing of cognitive abilities, knowledge, work skills, physical and motor abilities, personality, emotional intelligence, language proficiency, and even integrity. Pre-employment tests or employment screening tests are used to help employees identify candidates that will be a good fit for jobs for their company. A test may be in direct relation to the job. Testing should be fair and unbiased and shouldn't negatively impact someone based on race, national origin, gender, social class, or educational level. The first test we will look at is the cognitive test. Cognitive tests are assessments for the cognitive capabilities of humans. These tests can include various forms of IQ tests. A cognitive test can measure reasoning skills, math skills, verbal skills, and cognitive skills. It is important to note that some cognitive tests can have disparate impacts. In EOC versus Ford Motor Company and United Automobile Workers of America case, African Americans were rejected from a program after taking a cognitive test known as the ATSS that is show that significant disparate rejected them. Aptitude tests are used to determine an individual's ability and potential to succeed in a certain task and with no prior knowledge before training. Aptitude tests can be used in school exams and are frequently used as part of a pre-employment assessment. They measure the speed of typing or the ability to use a particular computer program. Employees can use aptitude tests to help them make the right hiring decisions. Aptitude tests are a proven tool used to identify those who are best equipped for the caring job. Aptitude tests can be held as an add-on to an interview or an online in the comfort of your own home. Personality tests, Myers-Briggs, and the Big Five personality factors may be measured and then compared with successful employee scores. Human resource professionals often use the Big Five personality dimensions to help place employees. That is because these dimensions are considered to be the underlying traits that make up an individual's overall personality. For example, the University of Missouri healthcare system recently launched the Patient Satisfaction Initiative as part of a strategic plan. The plan includes training for current employees and personality testing for nursing, managerial, and physician candidates. The goal of the test is to assess talent and to see if the candidate can meet it. The Big Five personality tests look at extroversion, agreeableness, consciousness, neuroticism, and openness. People who like to learn new things and enjoy new experiences usually score high in openness. Openness includes traits like being insightful and imaginative. People that have a high degree of consciousness and are reliable and prompt. Extroverts get their energy from interacting with others. Traits would be energetic and talkative. These individuals are friendly, cooperative, and compassionate. People with the agreeableness may be more distant. Neuroticism is also sometimes called emotional stability.
Some jobs require physical ability tests. Physical ability tests measure the physical ability of an applicant to perform a particular task or the strength of specific muscle groups, as well as the strength and stamina in general. If you use the test in your hiring process, the key to make them useful is to determine the minimum standard or expectation specifically. While some physical ability tests may require electronically monitored machines, equipment needs to be kept simple. Stamina can be measured with stairs, electrocardiograph, and treadmill. Many factors must be taken into consideration when using physical ability tests. A human resource manager should also consider all the legal issues that you have with these tests. A lot of the tests that involve strength and endurance tend to leave out a number of women and some ethnic minorities. Physical ability tests need to show direct correlation with the job, or it could be a legal issue. A job knowledge test measures the candidate's level of understanding about a particular job. Job knowledge tests evaluate a person knows at the time taken of the test. This test can be used to inform employees with an applicant currently known. The most typical form of this test is usually a multiple choice test. Examples of job knowledge tests include tests of basic accounting principles, computer programming, and financial management. For example, a job knowledge test may require an engineer to write a code in a given amount of time, or may ask a candidate to case study problem related to the job. Work sample tests ask candidates to show examples of work they have already done. So for example, in an advertising business, you might include a portfolio from a prior job that you have already used. This work sample can often be a good indicator of someone's ability in a specific area. Another test that is conducted is a drug test. Pre-employment testing is conducted to prevent hiring individuals who illegally use drugs. It typically takes place after a conditional offer of employment has been made. Applicants agree to be tested as a condition of employment and are not hired if they produce a negative test. During these slides, I have explained to you all the different tests that are administered during the hiring and before the hiring process. I now pass it off to Stephanie, who will tell you about the offer.
I'm in heels, forgive me if I fall. I want to be taller. So hi everyone, I'm Stephanie. I'm going to take us through the final part of selection, making the job offer. I'm going to tell you how and what it entails. But before we send out a job offer, we have to go through one more thing, and that's negotiations. So negotiations, can I speak? No. So negotiations are a tug of war between management and the candidate. This is a very important step that should be done before the job offer is made. And a lot of my experience, this is done in like the third or second round of interviews and can often determine whether a candidate is hired or not. So during the negotiation process, they will ask questions such as potential of an employee taking the job offer or turning it down, potential salary, and etc. After the negotiation, the offer letter is sent with the desired terms. At that point, the candidate has two options. They can either turn down the job offer if they don't like those terms, or they can ask to renegotiate. So when initially deciding on a candidate to extend the offer to, you have to keep in mind the scarcity of the particular job, the skill set, the going wages in your geographic area, the current economic conditions, anything basically we would learn in Professor Rudin's management and compensation. Other things to keep in mind is the level of the job, whether your budget constraints, what's the national and regional employment rates, are there other candidates that are more qualified? It's Rudin's class in a nutshell. That's the best way to describe that. Reasons why they would turn down the job offer would be if you didn't offer enough money, if you aren't their top pick, if they have other better offers, if you are unnegotiable or they are unnegotiable with the terms. An employer should keep in mind the time frames they have. The longer they wait to make a decision, the less likely that the candidate will still be available to accept the job. And it'll be hard to send out offers to runner-ups for that position. Once an employee accepts the job offer and the terms of employment, there's no going back on the pay rate or anything mentioned in the agreement. But I'll talk about what's in the agreement in a few slides. I have a list. So, being in college, we're all pretty familiar with Greek life. Yes, nods. So you know how you rush and then you'll receive a bid if you get in? It's similar to that. You receiving a bid or a job offer is basically the company saying, we want you like you're interested in us. But what does the offer look like? It usually, there's 2 ways or 3 technically. They could send you a letter, but that's still old-fashioned a little bit now. Or they could send you a phone call letting you know that you received the job, and they usually send the more information over email later. You could also end up receiving a call saying yes or no. I usually only receive a call when I receive a job. Usually they won't waste the time to give you a call if you don't get it. What's in the offer letter? It's the job title, salary, other compensation such as bonuses, stock options, benefits such as health coverage, 401ks, vacation time, paid holidays, start dates. So, as it was earlier discussed, you don't want to keep them waiting for a long period of time. You can receive an email. I've received multiple emails also saying, we still haven't made a decision, keeping you posted. We still are interested in you, but we just haven't made the decision yet. I've also gotten calls saying the same thing. I actually just got off the phone call a few hours ago. I wish. With a company that hasn't made the decision yet. And as I said, only get decisions. Phone calls. So 2 years ago, I worked at ShopRite over the summer. ShopRite pays me $9 an hour, have to pay $10 a week to union dues. Local, I did it. It's a summer job. Not the best place to work as a cashier. So last summer, I got a job offer at Clementon Park. For those of you who don't know, it's a rinky-dink water park and amusement park with like 5 rides. They offered me $9.50 an hour. However, there were no union dues, and I also worked in air conditioning, so like, yay. So my big determining factor for switching jobs was the pay and the union dues not being a factor. I also got an increase in my hours where I was working 20 hours a week over at ShopRite. I was working 40 plus at Clementon. So 40 plus the extra. So in the end, we went over the 2 methods of selection, clinical and statistical. We went over resumes along with the criteria to be on the resumes. Testing, such as drug tests, cognitive drugs, word vomit today. And interview, behavioral, statistical, everything that we've basically gone over in this. Thank you.
Didn't finish. We were rooting for you there at the end.
Yeah, once the word vomit started, there was no in the middle of the sentence.
Like once I saw Rachel, it was all downhill.
All right. Everybody have a good weekend. I will see you on Tuesday.
Like, how much you earn about it? Can I speak?
I mean, we have